a book about banking might not seem that exciting. And I think that at times it is potentially not.
Welcome to Keep It Fictional, a weekly podcast for book lovers by book lovers. Build your to-be-read list with Sadie, Liz, Virginia, Fiona, and Corrine from the Port Moody Public Library. Warning, this podcast contains strong opinions and may cause an increase in your library holds list.
Verso Books, Transit Books, Seagull, Unnamed Press, and Other Stories, New Directions, Archipelago, Two Lines Press, Hornford Stars, Tilted Axis Press, Seven Stories Press, Pushkin Press, Other Press, New York Review of Books, Europa Editions, Deep Vellum, and many other university presses. And I'm sure I have missed many, many, many more publishers. These amazing folks that we're going to celebrate today. Welcome to another episode of Keep It Fictional with the Port Moody Public Library. I'm Virginia, and I'm here with my two book friends, Sadie and Emma. I feel like next year I'm going to have to give this particular hosting duty up to somebody because I'm always hogging on this particular topic every single year because it's one of my favorite. As you all know, we do a lot of celebrations on this show. Very often we celebrate specific types of books, and today's is one of my favorite. According to my spreadsheet, and I can talk about spreadsheet here because Corrine is not here. According to my spreadsheet, 79.05% of my books are all books in translations. So without these folks who do translation, without these publishers who publish the books in translation, I would have nothing to read. So I am always super, super thankful for all those people that make this available to us so that readers that read any other language can enjoy books from everywhere around the world. As listeners know, we talk about books in translation all year long. This is not just the only episode that we mention them. This might be the show that you'll hear names like Anton Hur or Megan McDowell as often as you hear the name of Kelly Armstrong, because we love these people so, so, so much. We all have our special translators. We all have our special publisher that we love that help us get access to more books from different languages. So today we are celebrating National Translation Month because this is September. And of course, in August, we just celebrated Women in Translation Month. So it's months and months of books in translation that we are very, very excited to share with all of you. I'm going to pass it on to Emma so that Emma can share their favorite book in translation. Oh, I don't know if it's favorite, but the book that you read, I guess, may not be your favorite. I don't know. We'll find out. We will find out.
What a great transition. So this definitely was not my favorite book I've read in translation. It wasn't bad per se, but I wouldn't say I read as many books in translation as Virginia does. But as our listeners know, I do specifically read a lot of Japanese literature. So I do get a lot of translated works kind of in my regular reading. I also really enjoyed the Beartown series by Fredrik Backman, which is translated from Swedish. So in my reading history, I'm drawn to translated works quite often. I'm not like Corrine in that I have a favorite translator. I apologize. I haven't paid close enough attention to the names of the translators on the books that I've enjoyed, so I don't remember many of them. But especially after picking a book for this episode, I think I want to pay more attention to the translators that are putting in all this work to make these books accessible to us, because it really is so, so, so much work. And something kind of funny that was noted in my book that I read for today, the author has kind of a throwaway line about how at one point in their life, they wanted to be a translator, but then they realized that translators are just severely underpaid and make absolutely no money. So even within this book that was translated that I'm reading for the pod today, they're showing their own appreciation for translation and the work that translators do, which is pretty cool, pretty awesome to see that. So the book that I have today was translated from Dutch, and this is actually my first foray into Dutch literature, so this was a new one for me. This book I have, it's marketed as a novel, but it kind of reads a bit like an autobiography. I myself was getting a little confused throughout it. I was like, is this actually a novel? Is this actually fiction? And I looked a bit online and other people were having the same experience where they were kind of getting more of an autobiographical feel from this book. I think what it is technically is autofiction. So it is a novel. There are fictionalized elements to it, but a lot of the story is taken from the author's own experience. It's written in kind of a stream of consciousness style that takes a lot of stories from the author's own life. So it's kind of difficult to tell what parts are true versus what parts are more fictionalized or dramatized. And the writing style kind of reminded me a little bit of the Kurt Vonnegut books that I really loved in my late high school, early university days, where it's a fiction narrative, but the author inserts themselves into the book as a character and uses a lot of their own life experiences for plot. The book breaks the fourth wall pretty often. It speaks to the reader often, and it has this very kind of honest and frank and matter-of-fact writing voice, where the author very much tells it like it is. There's no sugary or flowery language. So if you're looking for something with more elegant and beautiful prose, then this might not be the right book for you. But if you're looking for a book that's a page turner where not a lot of plot happens, or a millennial's autobiography peppered with different philosophical insights, then you might enjoy this book that I have today. So this book was published in earlier 2024. It was published around February or March, and it's called The History of My Sexuality by Tobi Lakmaker. And it was translated from Dutch by Kristen Gehrman. Like I said earlier, the book claims to be a novel, but it's a bit more of a disjointed autobiography with some fiction elements here and there. The protagonist and narrator is a character named Sophie, who shares a last name with the author, so it's Sophie Lakmaker. And Sophie shares both her surname and also some major autobiographical details with the author, Tobi. Tobi Lakmaker is a transgender man, and he used the name Sophie prior to coming out. Typically, trans people don't often use their former names after coming out and changing their name, but Tobi is quite frank and quite honest about the fact that he used to be called Sophie, so I feel like it's more appropriate to talk about it here, especially since the character uses the name as well. So plot-wise, the book is separated into 3 separate parts. The first is more in chronological order, and it more or less goes through about half a dozen of different failed relationships that Sophie had with both men and women throughout her teens and her early adulthood. She has a series of sexual encounters with boys as a teenager, most of which involved a lot of awkward fumbling. And she dates a series of kind of, I would say, douchebag types, boys and men who never really seem to truly see her for who she is, truly understand her, which becomes more and more evident as she grows up and realizes that she's actually a lesbian. So as a young adult, Sophie starts dating mostly women, including women from her football team. And because this is Dutch, when we say football, we actually mean soccer. So people from her football team. She dates an egotistical actress. She dates a really dramatic art director who at one point throws all of Sophie's furniture out onto the street and just completely guts her entire apartment. So these are kind of the series of failed relationships that she goes through. And pretty much all of these romantic and sexual encounters end in failure, either because Sophie realizes that they're not healthy relationships and she gradually becomes more apathetic. She kind of distances herself from these people. Or in some cases, she was never truly committed to her partner at all. So that distance kind of grows on its own. And as she's recounting these relationships in the book, bits and pieces are coming together about Sophie's gender identity. She's never really truly felt seen while she was dating men. She had long hair, and she never really felt like herself when people would call her beautiful. They'd be like, "You have beautiful long hair. You're this beautiful woman, this beautiful girl." And she always kind of had a complicated relationship with that. Once she shaved her head, she wasn't called beautiful anymore. But now, instead of being called a beautiful woman, she is kind of being treated like she's a boy. She's often mistaken for being a 15-year-old boy, even as she's into her early 20s. So she's always being told that she should grow her hair out, which any queer woman who's ever shaved their head relates to that, myself included. So that's kind of how the beginning of the book goes. It's got these complicated stories of Sophie's different relationships that she's had. She's kind of growing to understand her sexual identity and her gender identity better. And then the second part of the book goes back into the past, more into Sophie's university days. And it tells what she describes a more intellectual history of Sophie's coming of age with, I'd say, mixed success. So she studied literature, and then she switched to studying philosophy. And then she ends up studying Russian with the hopes of becoming a translator. This is when she mentions that plan was kind of turned when she realized that translators made very little money. So in her studies, Sophie goes on a series of study abroad trips with her different departments. And on these trips, it seems like the author was trying to send some sort of like insightful philosophical message, some like bigger picture, like this is what I learned on all of these backpacking trips across Europe. But this part ends up being more about other failed sexual relationships. So there's not a whole lot of insight to be found. But what I found kind of interesting is the author is quite self aware of this. Something I appreciated is how the author is very frank about how confusing the structure of the book can be. And at one point, Sophie openly says in her narration, what I've been trying to do in part 2 is to offer some kind of intellectual history, but it's not working. So she's pretty honest about like, this is kind of what I was attempting to do through this book, but that's not really what's happening anyway. So like, it's confusing, but she doesn't really kind of circle back and like say a bigger message after kind of going through all these different relationships. But then she's honest about that. So it's got this weird thing going on. And then we get to the third part of the book, which, according to Sophie, makes a giant leap into something I guess you could call the present. So this part was actually my favorite part of the book. This is the part I connected to the most. And this is where Sophie shares her experience with the death of her mother, something that was kind of like looming over her for the entire story. So throughout the book, she's mentioning different things about her mother, different like conversations that she's had with her, but we never properly meet her mother until at the end when we learn that her mother had cancer and that her mother passed away in Sophie's mid-20s. So this is the part that I enjoyed the most, actually. Sophie kind of abandons her desire to be witty and astute, and she just like allows herself to fully feel her grief. And she recounts pretty much exactly how she was feeling in the moment as she's kind of going through this experience of grief, as she's learning that her mother is sick. This part I found actually really relatable. I thought it was a really realistic portrayal of grief. She talks about how she laughed at inappropriate moments when all she wanted to do, all she thought she should be doing was crying, but instead she was laughing. She talks about how her dad would cope by just continually making coffee for everyone and like not really engaging with what was going on. And of all the parts of the book, this is the part that to me felt the most authentic and the most genuine. And it gave me a greater appreciation for Sophie and for what she was going through throughout the other parts of the story. So that was a bit about the plot of the book. The writing style is kind of in this like familiar, like millennial confessional style that I think is more popular these days. It's filled with these like funny, sharp observations, but it doesn't really dive deep enough into any of them to make much of a lasting impact. As Sophie's talking about her academic life, she's got this disdain for the books that she's been told to read, for the people around her. It's a little bit like Holden Caulfield-y, where she's just talking about how everybody around her is a phony and she's like holier than thou, kind of above these people. So it can get a little bit annoying at times. The book is also loaded with these references to Dutch media personalities and footballers. And then there's observations on like the class relations between different neighborhoods in Amsterdam, which makes for great cultural criticism if you understand what the author is talking about. But from a North American audience, a lot of the references fall flat when they're taken out of their cultural context. There was only one like reference to a famous Dutch person that I understood, and that was because she was talking about an actress who was in Game of Thrones. So I was like, yeah, this is the one person that I recognize, but pretty much all of these other people you're talking about are like musicians and footballers and like people that North Americans wouldn't really be familiar with. It makes the book a little bit harder to get into if you're not understanding that cultural context. And I typically enjoy books that are a bit more vague about where and when they take place. So it makes it easier to relate to the experiences of the characters. You don't have to know all of these reference points to really get into it. So that's something that made it a little bit harder to get into. The book feels very specifically Dutch, very much in Amsterdam. They make a lot of references to specific streets. So it could be a little more difficult for people outside of the Netherlands to really immerse themselves into it. It's filled with a lot of really heavy themes. They talk a lot about loss and love and gender and sexual identity, but the author doesn't really go deep enough into any of these themes to really say anything about them, I would say. There's a lot of like funny anecdotes about these strange encounters that she's having, but she's not going deep enough into to like really get into what Sophie is feeling with all of these topics. Sophie builds intimacy with the reader by addressing them directly. There's a lot of asides and kind of moments where they're talking in the second person, but it also maintains enough distance that you never really see Sophie get vulnerable. So it kind of has these different things going on. It was hard for me to fully immerse myself in the book because like it can be very witty. There's a lot of funny little quips there, but it's nothing that really sticks around long enough. None of these characters stuck around long enough or made me really truly care about them. So it was an interesting read because it was fun. Parts of it were definitely fun, but parts of it were harder to allow myself to really and fully invest in it, which is sad because I typically love books about like millennial queer identity, being a millennial queer person. So I wouldn't say I hated this book, but it definitely was not my favorite book that I've ever read. Like it tried a little bit too hard at like trying to be funny, trying to be witty and insightful and philosophical, and nothing truly felt like it landed. I read an author interview with Tobi Lakmaker, with the author of the book, and I learned that he is a magazine columnist in Amsterdam. So I think a lot of this like witty, quippy writing, a lot of the cultural criticism that he incorporates in his book would translate really well to column writing, to magazine writing. But I'm not sure if in the novel format it really worked for me personally. But if you're interested in confessional writing, if you like more autobiographical fiction, if you're okay with kind of problematic and unreliable narrators, or if you like stories that deal with topics like grief and mental illness with some more candid humor to them, then you might enjoy The History of My Sexuality by Tobi Lakmaker, which was translated into English from Dutch by Kristen Gehrman.
Thank you, Emma. I love that. Like, whether you like a book or not, you always provide a really, really good, not just analysis, but also you say, well, if you like these stuff in this column, then you might enjoy the book.
I didn't love it, but somebody else might like it. So I'm not going to say don't read it at all. I'm just going to say if you like these things, then maybe you should check this one out. I'm quite honest in my reviews.
Yes, you are. But that helps. That helps readers decide, right? Because when you start talking about things like asides, fourth war, and then like also like a confusing structure, that really, I feel like that actually works really well because like, many of us try to figure out our past and it's confusing. It doesn't make sense, right? So I like that they use that structure to kind of help you like see how confusing their life might be. And I really like that. And it's football. It's not soccer. I don't know what soccer is. It's always football. Anyway, I want to ask you because I think this is a question that came up before, but when you mentioned that like this is a book that you feel like, you really will kind of get to experience the culture and maybe like a lot of Amsterdam that like are references. Do you feel like this is a book that you would kind of suggest to people who like, how sometimes people like to read books? I think we talked about this before. People like to read books before they go to a place. Do you feel like that would be a good one just so that they can really get a sense of what like a city might feel like to somebody who lives there?
Yeah, I've been to Amsterdam before. And so as I was reading the book, Sophie was talking about it's hard for me to do pronouns with this one because the author is a trans man, but the character is a woman. So I'm like, when I say she, I'm talking about Sophie. And anyway, but Sophie talks about like sitting along the canals with her various different sexual partners and like hanging out and going to these clubs. And I'm not a clubber, but it's obviously something that's really popular in like urban European lifestyle. She does these backpacking trips across Europe. She was talking about like, oh, we were camping in the south of France and my friend was living in Aix-en-Provence and I've been to the south of France. So it's kind of fun to like visualize where Sophie is on these adventures that she's going on. And because she's saying like specific street names, specific neighborhoods all throughout Amsterdam, if you're reading the book with Google Maps open next to you, then you can like see exactly where all of these things are happening. You can find the cafes that she's working at and you can find the bars that she's going to. So if you're interested in like learning about like millennial Amsterdam, then it could definitely be a really fun book. It's just if you are looking for something more to like something more relatable, something that's more like, oh, I can kind of see my own experience in this. Because of how specific the details are in this book, it might not be the right choice for that. But it is like extremely Dutch. Like she's name dropping Dutch celebrities and like a lot of Dutch footballers. There were a lot of people mentioned. But if you're interested in learning more about like how Dutch people view Amsterdam and like there's some commentary on like the class relations between different neighborhoods, like Sophie grew up in quite a privileged neighborhood. So they talk about like different stuff like that. So you can definitely learn quite a bit about Amsterdam through reading it. But I also like, I can't remember every specific street name that she mentions. So, and she also does a lot of references to cycling everywhere, how she's always riding her bike all over the place, which is a very Amsterdam thing. So, Yeah, if you're interested in going to Amsterdam or learning more about it, then this could definitely be a good book to kind of guide you there.
It could be cool. Also, it would probably be good for people who like going down rabbit holes. Because I mean, part of it, sometimes when you're reading these books, you're like, what is that? Like, who is that? And then, it gives you like a chance to just kind of look everything up, I guess. Yeah. Sadie, have you been to Amsterdam? No? Well, you can read this book and see if you want to go there.
I feel like it's on my list. I mean, there are so many countries on my list, but it's one of them.
Amsterdam is beautiful. When I went, I rented a bike and just got lost biking on all the different streets with the canals. So like it's the kind of city you don't have to have much of an agenda. You can just like rent a bike and go. And like that's how I would recommend seeing Amsterdam. But also paying attention to the cycling rules because the Dutch people are crazy.
All right, some travel tips for our listeners. All right, I will share my book. I was just saying to somebody the other day that I feel like my books haven't had bugs in them for a while. And that's supposed to be like my theme. So I don't know what happened. I guess technically last week, the Kenji Miyazaki's short story collection does have bugs, but they're more like kind of anthropomorphic like bugs in fables and things. So I don't think they count. But don't worry, bugs are back. After bringing you cockroaches and bed bugs and slugs, I present to you today mosquitoes. So I discovered this book actually through a translator. And this actually has been a try and true way for me to get to know more authors that I haven't heard of before. Because I think translators are super readers. They're like Emma described earlier. There's a lot of work involved in translating. And I think they are going to want to translate books that they also really love, that they want to bring to more readers so that more people can read them. And so I feel like when you're looking at like sort of a list of what the translator has done, very often you're kind of getting like almost feel like you're getting personal recommendations from them. So I find that whenever I discover a translator that I really enjoy their work, after I read a couple of them, like, this seems like my type of books. I often like to look up what else they translate to see what other books that they would recommend kind of to me. So, and that has worked out quite well. So today, because there's too many books to choose from, so I kind of went this route. I picked a translator and I kind of explored their backlist a little bit. It's a translator that I have read for the first time this year. His name is Kit Schluter, and actually, I got to know him from his book first. He is also a writer, and he published a short story collection this year called Cartoons, and made me really appreciate microfiction for the first time. I never really quite got them, but his was amazing. And then a couple months ago, for our most anticipated fall reads, I read the book called Thinking About Gladys Machine by Mario Lavero. And to my delight, realized that it is translated by the same person that already read a collection. And after reading his book and also his translated work, I can see why he picked Mario Lavero, because both of the collections are super banana pants. They're like just really, really delightful stories, so absurd, so hilarious, and just so much fun. And so I love it. So I wanted to explore some other books by him. I read two of them for today. I'm going to talk about only one, and still bananas, but like a very different kind of bananas. This is more like definitely more on the weird, surreal, and more serious. The book is called His Name Was Steph, and it's by Rafael Bernal, and as I mentioned, translated by Kit Schluter. So our story features a named narrator, and I think sometimes when people decide to do a name narrator, I always kind of wonder why. Why not name them? But I think this one actually has a reason. It's a key part of the story why this remained an unnamed narrator. This is a middle-aged white man who has decided to turn his back on his fellow people. He's done with these so-called civilizations, and he decided to move to the jungle in Chiapas, Mexico. We're not really quite sure why, but he feels like the world has wronged him so badly. He's so done with people. He's so done with the rest of it. He just wants to go away. You can feel how angry he is at the world. He has been accused of being a drunk that's better off dead. And as he said, if I was a drunk, it was the world's fault. So he decided to move, and the only people that he have contact with is one of the indigenous group that lives in the area, the Lakandan people. And at first they started off just more like just trading. He would go and hunt animals, and then he would trade them for food. But soon he lives among this particular group. And they kind of help him stop drinking. Every time they spotted any other traders or any other white people, they would just move further into the jungle. The Lakandan people call him the Wise Owl. And that's the name I'm going to use so that I can say the word owl a bunch of times today. They think that he's the wise owl. They think that he is one of the serpent god because they believe that he has some powers, that he somehow can like talk to spirits. And YSIO didn't really bother to correct them. Whatever they like to believe about him, that's fine. Slowly, he feels a little bit better about himself, about being here. But there are definitely two things that keeps him up at night. One of them is still his rage, his very intense resentment of people in general and the world that he came from. And the other thing that keeps him up at night, the mosquitoes. There are so many mosquitoes. Their incessant buzzing, their constant assaults, trying to suck his blood. And he basically just spent the whole night killing mosquitoes with his bare hands. And he would like put all of them on his little table. And in the morning, there would just be like this big pile of dead mosquitoes. First, that's kind of what he was doing. And he was very annoyed at these mosquitoes. But then he decided that I have nothing to do. I need to find something to focus. He decided to study the mosquitoes, especially the sounds that the mosquitoes make. Because he believes that the mosquitoes are probably using the sounds to communicate with one another. So he wanted to learn, are there like different vocal ranges? Are there different patterns? He is trying to listen really carefully to see if he could figure out when they have this particular sequence of sound, does it mean something? And does it mean something, the same thing every single time? So he's trying to like kind of decipher is there like a language? And gradually, he started to learn and he started to like figure out that there's certain sounds that always means certain things. And so he decided to name this language the Mossville language, and he decided to like compile a dictionary of all the different sounds. Once he feel like he has got a pretty good command of their language, he wanted to see if he could communicate with them. So he tried to like reproduce the sounds himself. But he figured that there's just certain sounds, certain like things that he just can't make. So he gets somebody to build him an instrument that could make those certain specific sounds. And when it was finally done, he used the instrument to say come when there was one single mosquito that was kind of hovering about. And the minute the mosquito heard the sound, you could tell the mosquito is freaked out because there are no other mosquitoes around. Who is telling me to come? And so the mosquito left because it was so freaked out by this sound that is coming from like nowhere. Never would have thought that it was a human making that sound. Our wise owl figured that I can speak mosquito now. I know how to speak their language. And we learned as the mosquitoes came back and he tried to communicate and to talk to them. The mosquitoes, of course, are quite surprised because this is the first time in their many years of life that someone was able to produce the sounds to communicate with them. But the mosquitoes kind of know this is going to happen somehow. And they've got a plan. They've got a plan for the humans. And they are going to ask Wise Owl to help them enact this plan. So this is the book. His name was Steph. It was published in 1947 and translated and published by New Directions in 2021 in English. The author of this book, Rafael Bernal, is a Mexican novelist, best known for his crime novels, pulpy noir kind of style crime novels. The only one that has been translated into English so far is called The Mongolian Conspiracy, also published by New Directions, I believe. One of my favorite publisher. And this one is quite different, as you know, it's more of a science fiction. Still a bit pulpy because, you know, the sentient mosquitoes after all, but definitely the kind of science fiction that I would say has also a little bit more of a literary bent. It's a very quick read, 150 pages only, but like many science fiction, it does dive a lot into some more philosophical, existential questions. And like many other science fiction, whether it is the pulpy kind or whether it is the like literary kind, like there's always a lot of metaphors and allegories involved in here, and everything kind of stands for something else. And there's of course like different groups involved here. There's the indigenous people that live in Mexico. There's the white people that came to try to exploit them. And it's not the most comfortable read to start with sometimes because even though Wise Owl care for the people that he lives with, you can tell that he has this upbringing and he can't help himself. He's thinking that like, I'm here to save them. And then of course there's the mosquitoes. it's quite interesting what they did with the mosquitoes, because the mosquitoes, as Wise Owl slowly learned, is actually highly organized. They are very, very clear hierarchy in their society. They very much value the collective as opposed to the individual. And of course, the mosquitoes see themselves as a superior species. And that is, of course, a very science fiction kind of concept, right? Like, you come across like a new society and you learn about how they work. And that is a way to explore the different political ideologies in our world. Many people see His Name Was Steph, this book, as kind of a precursor to many of the eco-fiction that is out there. And I think having gone through the pandemic also, you might see some parallels. You might be able to see some messaging that feels very ahead of time, given that this book was written in 1947. Definitely about humans who think so much of themselves, and also what happens when you give people a little bit too much power. I don't want to say too much about the book because I think it's just a really fun one to discover what's going to happen, what is the mosquito plans, and how Wise Owl is going to react to it. But promise you there's going to be uprising, there's going to be bioweapons, there's going to be a lot of religious and philosophical debates. There's going to be talk about what is an ideal society. They even love triangles in this book. And of course, there are also mosquitoes. So if you also need some bugs book in your life, if you need some more translator work, if you just are interested in a little bit of a science fiction, maybe a little bit apocalyptic, this might be a book to check out. It is His Name Was Death by Rafael Bernal, and it is translated by Kit Schluter. All right. So before we move to Sadie's book, it's time for our existential question. I don't give this too existential today, but I would love for my book friends to share. Is there a book, whether it's like a novel, a nonfiction, a poetry, play, musical, or whatever, or like, a movie or a TV show that makes you want to learn a language? And did you actually go and learn a language? I guess that's my follow-up question.
I can go first since mine's kind of an easy answer. Virginia and I have both talked before about wanting to learn Japanese so that we can read Japanese fiction in the original language. I briefly took a Japanese course, just like the beginner Japanese 1 course at UBC, and I loved it. But because I didn't go too far into it, like I can't read hiragana, I can't read any Japanese writing. I learned how to say a couple phrases here and there. But I've always thought it would be really fun to learn Japanese so I can understand what they say in anime. And while I was in this course, I was watching this Japanese reality show on Netflix called Terrace House. It's very wholesome. The whole premise is there are 3 boys, 3 girls, 6 young adults living in a house together and just being housemates. So they go to work, they go to the grocery store, maybe they date each other, who knows? But it's very cute, it's very wholesome. And in the show, the language that they use, the phrases that they say often are do you have work today? How was your day? We should go to the grocery store. It's all very kind of simple Japanese language. And so watching that show while being in the course was really helpful for remembering a lot of the things I was learning. So my easy answer is I would love to learn Japanese so I can watch Japanese shows and read Japanese books. But it's not I want to learn it to read one specific book or to watch one specific show. Because I love all different types of Japanese media, it would just be useful to be able to speak it. But I took Spanish in school growing up, and Virginia, hearing you talk about your book kind of was making me think oh, it'd be really nice to start working on my Spanish again, so that because I took enough of Spanish that I would be able to read more simple Spanish fiction just after reviewing it a little bit more. But it was so long ago that I took it that a lot of it's probably lost now. So it would be nice to get back into learning Spanish again as well.
Thank you, Emma. I'm very envious that you could read Spanish. And I also heard that that's really smart, because I heard that reality shows are actually a really good way to learn languages, especially if you're interested in the conversational part of it, because they are talking about real stuff, right? Where sometimes anime, I love anime, but the stuff that they talk about, it's not words that you can say in every day.
They're not talking about real stuff. But no, so if you're interested in Japanese, I would highly recommend Terrace House, because I like bad reality TV, so I watch Love is Blind and Love Island and stuff like that, and I don't think you would like that kind of stuff. But Terrace House is so just cute and wholesome and wonderful that I would recommend Terrace House to you, Virginia. And it's super, super helpful for learning Japanese phrases. So shout out to Netflix for that one.
How about you, Sadie?
Just on a side note, I too would like to pick up my Spanish again. So maybe you and me, Emma, we could start talking about because it's been even longer for me. It's been even longer for me. But I did. I took it in school as well, and I loved it. So maybe one day. So my answer is a bit of a cop out a little bit. Mine is music, but not like a specific song or specific musical. But when I was regularly singing in choirs, we would always sing Gaelic songs. And I can sing in Gaelic, but I have no idea what I'm saying. No idea. And if I was put in front of me, I don't think I could actually pronounce the words outside of knowing the specific song. So that would be one that I would love to learn. Gaelic or Irish, I think, depending on kind of what country. I think in Ireland it's just called Irish, but I would kind of love to learn any type of Gaelic, and partially because so then when I'm singing Gaelic songs that I can pretend to pronounce, then I can actually know what I'm saying. What about you, Virginia?
Well, I think people like on the show has heard me said it a lot of times. Like definitely Japanese. I'm still attempting one day. But I also have like resigned to the fact that I will never be able to speak it. So I should focus on reading because that's really why I want to learn it. So I'm just like, let's just focus on the reading. If I can't say like, how to go to the bathroom, that's okay. I feel like I should just focus. But yeah, Spanish, that was when I started reading a lot more Latin American literature in translation. I'm like, I want to learn Spanish. So definitely I started like trying to, pretend to learn Spanish. And of course, the most recent one is after I read Clarice Lispector. I'm like, I need to learn Portuguese now. But like I stopped myself because I have very short attention span. So I'm like, I know that like I can, like you can't just keep jumping from one language to another. That doesn't make sense. So I have to stop myself. But like I think that would be the one right now at this moment, that would be the language that I want to learn to read the most because I really would love to know what her writing is like in the original language. And when I first read the first book by her, the translator Idra Nove, I think also probably has the same experience. Like I feel like she said in her introduction that she learned also so that she could read Clarice Lispector. I'm like, well, if she could do it, maybe I could. No, just kidding. It's never going to happen. Anyway, so thank you for that. And I hope that we all love languages here. So whatever inspiration that you have to go pick up a language, it's a great thing. So yeah, we'll definitely be getting Emma and Sadie for Spanish lessons now. We need a library program, please. Like, can we request a library program? Spanish conversation.
I think I still have all of my high school Spanish notes somewhere.
Mine might be at my parents' house. And I am a trained teacher, but not a trained Spanish teacher. So I don't think my Spanish is good enough to be an instructor yet. But I'll keep you posted, Virginia.
Perfect. All right. So we're going to go to Sadie for her recommendation today.
All right. So I, for whatever reason, do not actually tend to read a lot of translated works. And I wish that I read more. And that could, I think, might be a goal for me in the upcoming year is to kind of look into more translated works so that I kind of have more to pull from when this episode comes up. I enjoy the stuff that I read for around this time of year, but I don't read a lot of it throughout the year. So that is something that I am going to work on because I would love to kind of see what else is out there and just hearing Virginia, you always talking about translated works, and Emma, hearing you talk about the stuff that you read for this week. It makes me want to explore it more. So that is something I will do. The book that I did pick for today was actually one that came onto my radar last year when we did do our books in translation episode, but I was not able to get my hands on it last year. So this year I thought I would try it again. So I was able to pick up a copy of it. And this is a big book, The Enigma of Room 622 by Joël Dicker. And Joël is a Swiss author. He writes in French. This book was translated from the French by Robert Bononno, who's been translating works for over 30 years. And this story is kind of a story within a story within a story. And as most books, it begins with a writer. Now, our writer lives in Geneva, Switzerland. He's well known and has sold millions of copies of his books, mostly due to his amazing publisher, Bernard de Falois. However, Bernard has just died, and our writer is feeling a little bit lost. This is all, in fact, true about the character in the book. It is also true about our author, Joël Dicker. And while the writer in the book is never actually named, it is clear that our author has placed himself as a character in the story. The writer has decided to honor his publisher, mentor, and friend by writing a book about him. And this too is true about our author. It is during this process that he meets Sloane, beautiful, passionate, living right next door to him. They begin an impromptu love affair, immediately drawn to one another. However, the passion quickly starts to wane as the writer realizes that he has been forsaking his writing and, by association, forsaking the memory of his dear publisher. And so he turns his focus back to his book. Soon, Sloane sees that the writer will always be putting his work first, and so she leaves him. Heartbroken and distraught, the writer takes himself on a retreat to the small village of Verbier in the Swiss Alps and checks into the Hôtel de Verbier to mourn both of his recent losses. Upon arriving, he is led to room 623. Seems pretty normal. As the porter brings him down the hall, he notices that room 622 seems to be missing. In its place, instead, is 621A. Curious about this strange anomaly, the writer inquires with another hotel guest, Scarlett, who is actually staying in the mystery room. This spurs Scarlett on to begin an investigation to discover why the hotel has erased an entire hotel room and why the staff of the hotel refused to talk about it. The answer is simple: murder. Years ago, on a cold evening in December, a corpse was found in room 622. The murderer was never discovered, the crime was never solved, and the hotel decided it was better to pretend that room 622 never existed. Scarlett is not, however, willing to accept this. Intrigued, after recognizing who the writer is, she decides that this story must be told, and the writer must tell it, and she will help. So, the two start their investigation into the murder of room 622. As they investigate, they slowly learn that everything that happened on that December night is linked to one of Switzerland's largest banks. Now, the bank holds an employee gala at the hotel every December. And the December before the murder, the gala had already made quite a stir. It was set to be when the new president of the bank was announced, following the death of Abel Ebesner the year before. Abel's son, Macaire, knew it would be him, as had been tradition since the bank first opened in the 1700s. However, Macaire and everyone at the gala is shocked when Abel's will announces that he has gone against tradition and puts the decision to a vote by the now 3-person board of directors. The decision will be announced at the following year's gala dinner. Macaire is furious, embarrassed, ashamed at his father's decision. However, he knows that his father hasn't looked at him the same in over 15 years, ever since Macaire, for seemingly no reason at all, transferred all of his bank shares to Signor Tarnagol, a shady man who nobody really knows anything about, and is now one of the board of directors. However, there's more to Macaire's decision than anyone realizes, and more to Macaire himself. For the last 12 years, he's been living a double life. One where he is both a mild-mannered wealth manager who is really not that good at his job, and also a secret agent for the Swiss government. The P30, a section of the Department of Defense. For years, he has been using his knowledge of finances and his client list from the bank to track down traitors and embezzlers for the government. He still believes that he will be named president, and in doing so, he knows that he will need to step down from P30. However, as the gala and the announcement draw near, Macaire starts to realize that his chances of being named president are actually much lower than he thought. And he is forced to look at all possibilities to get the job that he believes he is owed. When his P30 contact approaches him with a solution to his problems, he thinks he's finally going to get what he wants. That is, as long as he is okay with just some mild government-issued murder. As Macaire starts to work out that he's been backed into a corner that he can't easily escape from, he needs to decide if getting the job he's always expected is worth what he is being asked to give up. So this book jumps around quite a bit in both time and kind of format. It goes from the writer in the present day, which is 2018, and Scarlett as they kind of dig deeper into their investigation. It goes back to Macaire in a time that we are not told of. They don't really say when this earlier time is. You don't know when the murder actually took place. They give hints as you go along. You know that it's recent enough for there to be cell phones, but that's kind of it. They don't really tell you much more than that. So it jumps back to that in the weeks before the gala as Macaire tries to kind of navigate this dangerous political game that he didn't even really realize that he was playing. It also goes to flashbacks to 15 and 16 years before the murder, providing background information on Macaire, on his wife Anastasia, and his business rival Lev, giving the reader kind of more information about all of these events, which do inevitably lead to the murder in room 622. Many of the scenes of Macaire and Lev and Anastasia are written almost as if they are actually the writer's first draft of this book that he is attempting to write based on his investigations, which makes things read a bit strangely as you're not entirely sure if what you have just read is actually what happened or is something that the writer has created in his story. You know that he has information that you don't, that he's done for his investigation. So you can kind of imagine that that's what he's using to write this, but you're not entirely sure what is being fictionalized for his book. Also, the fact that the writer is kind of, for all intents and purposes, the author of the book, it kind of adds that even more kind of convoluted layer to how the story is told. To make it even stranger, you don't know who's been killed and you don't find out for quite a while. So full disclosure, I'm not done this book. I'm just over halfway through and I still have no idea who has actually been killed. You know that someone has. The first page of the book tells you that there's been a murder in room 622, but that is kind of all that you know. So it kind of adds that other layer to the reading experience where you have no idea who it actually is, even when Scarlett and the writer are kind of doing their investigation. They know, you know that they know who it is, but they don't tell you, which is kind of an interesting reading experience, kind of knowing that the characters know more than the reader does and they're kind of specifically not saying anything. I would say that even though I am not finished this book, I am really enjoying it. I find that it's not the kind of book that you can read quickly. I think that it's the kind of book that kind of invites you to more take your time and explore the characters and explore the story, explore kind of the scene of it. And even though it kind of has more kind of high stakes elements to it, it doesn't necessarily, I wouldn't say like it reads like a spy novel. It doesn't read like a murder mystery. It reads more kind of with a focus on the characters and kind of learning about their backgrounds, learning about their history and their relationships. And kind of through that, you're able to piece together kind of all of these different parts that are going to come and eventually reveal what actually happened and what events from 20 years earlier have led to this actually happening. The way that Joël Dicker writes the story, he's able to add enough intriguing elements to it that he's able to balance out kind of the potentially less interesting aspects of it. A book about banking might not seem that exciting. And I think that at times it is potentially not. But I think that he is able to kind of balance that out with the fact that our main banker is a secret agent for the government. And you kind of get all these kind of side stories and side characters that kind of add to the interest of the book and kind of make it more exciting to read. I think that the way he writes it, he never fully gives up important pieces of information. He kind of alludes to things without actually telling you outright that something has happened. So you know that there's a ton of characters who are trying to hide things or who are hiding things, but you have no idea how what they're hiding plays into any of the other aspects of it. You don't know kind of who is working with who or for who and kind of how it all ties together, which I think does make it kind of more fun to read because you're a little bit confused, but you're along for the ride and it's fun to kind of figure it out. It's meant to be savored a little bit more. Dicker did write the book as an homage to his publisher. That aspect of the story is not fictionalized. His publisher was Bernard de Falloy or Bayos. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly. And he did pass away in 2018. And the author did want to kind of write this story for him. And so he definitely includes that as an actual non-fictionalized aspect of it. The characters in the book They don't interact with the publisher. The character of the publisher himself doesn't actually come up a lot, but in kind of the writer telling his history to Scarlett and the writer explaining what his relationship with his publisher was, it kind of is able to give voice to the stories and the history of this man who our author very clearly admired and wanted to kind of have as this book to remember him by. So yeah, I think that if you do enjoy a mystery that has a bit more focus on characters, less on the actual crime itself, or if you enjoy kind of being held in suspense, trying to figure out what exactly happened, who exactly was killed, and what's kind of going on with all these kind of multiple pieces working together, including secret government agents, under the table deals to save people's lives, dramatic love affairs, double lives, which lead to murder. Like all of this stuff just kind of goes together and creates a fun, engaging story. So if that sounds like something you would like, then I would definitely check out The Enigma of Room 622 by Joël Dicker, translated from the French by Robert Bononno. And a weird side fact, this is the second book that I have read in the last week that does not reveal who the victim of a crime was until the very end. Interesting way of writing the book.
Thank you, Sadie. And also interesting when you said like, oh yeah, the characters know more than the readers. Very often it's the opposite, right? So it's like it must be very weird. And like you said, it's hard to probably have to write that way and make sure that, that doesn't get leaked out somewhere. And I can see that it really does take a lot of skills to be able to like have like so many layers and so many convoluted stuff, but like also still keep you engaged, as you said, like you're still really interested to know what's going on, even that there's so many unknowns. I find sometimes when I'm going to say Netflix because, Emma already gave Netflix a shout out. Sometimes Netflix shows I find like they're very annoying because it's like they just keep not telling you things. And I'm like, well, like you have to give me something to care about you, because else I'm not interested. You can just say, oh, well, I'm gonna tell you later or whatever. Like, but it's like, just give me something. But it sounds like this one, the author manages to throughout the whole book give you enough things to keep you guessing.
That was my issue with the show Lost for so long, because you would end the episode so much more confused than when you started the episode. It's like, okay, so you've answered this, but then you've introduced 5 more things that you're not going to tell us anything about. And now I have no idea what's going on.
So Sadie, since you said that you haven't finished it quite yet, you're assuming they're going to tell you who get killed at the end, are you?
It's interesting because one of the reviews I was reading say that the ending is like quite unbelievable. And so like it kind of like goes like way off into left field in like a very, very unbelievable, fantastical way. So I'm intrigued exactly what that means. But I do think I didn't read who gets killed, but it does. Another review I was reading did say like it takes a while, but it does tell you. Yeah.
Because I love to read a book when they don't tell you. Maybe after 600, 700 pages later. Nope, not going to say anything. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much, Emma, Sadie, bringing different types of books. We have some autofiction, we have mystery, and then we have, I don't know, science fiction, whatever this is. But thank you so much for bringing all different types. And Sadie, you mentioned earlier, it's hard to find. And like, I think the stat that always get thrown out, and I think this is quite out of date, but like they always say it's like 3%. 3% of all books that are published in North America is a work of translation. So they are hard to find. They are very hard to find. So I hope that the people that making this, changing this, getting more support, getting more funding and everything so that they can actually make more of this available to us. And I just want to leave with the last thing, which is September 30th. It's the International Translation Day. And their theme this year is Protect Translation as an Art. And I think that's a really appropriate theme, especially given that sometimes people think that robots can do a lot of things. It's really important to acknowledge how much work that a translation requires. It's not just about substituting a word with another word. It's really about reading the book, digesting it, and trying to communicate that same writing style, same tone, atmosphere, so much of the original work. Try to communicate in a different language. As many people say, you're like actually writing a new book in many sense. So it is definitely an art. It is not something that even if we can master Spanish, it's not something that any of us could do probably. So again, Thank you so much for all the translators and all the publishers out there that specialize in translation. You are bringing so much joy to us and to readers all around the world. So thank you for all the work that you do. And I am sure you will hear about books in translation all throughout the year from us. So look forward to more books in all different formats and all different ways. So thank you again for tuning into another episode of Keep It Fictional, and we will see you next week. Happy reading.
Thank you for listening. If you like our show, please tell a fellow book lover about it. You can find a list of all the books we discussed in our show notes. Join us next week for another fun book chat. Until then, keep it fictional.